is it? Where can we find it? What are we looking for? And it might be things that you might not have even thought of. Now, first of all, there's things like misspelt words. So you can have incorrect product descriptions, incorrect item descriptions, incorrect product names, and they can cause a lot of problems, including multiple versions of the same thing. You can even have incorrect descriptions, which can cause miscategorization and all sorts of problems. And of course, there's things like missing product codes as well. So if you've set up a product, but you've not put the code in, that is going to cause a lot of issues in terms of manufacturing, planning, selling, distribution, all kinds of things. And then there's my favorite, there's data that's in the wrong columns. And I see this a lot in particularly addresses. So you either get the whole address in one cell, or you find the zip code in the city column or the state column in the city column, and it's all over the place. So I do a lot of cleaning for that, and I'm sure you're nodding at your head and going, yeah, we do that too. And then there are no standard units of measure. So we are increasingly a global community where we spell things differently and maybe measure things differently. So how are you spelling liters, kilometers? Are we talking miles or inches? Everybody's using something different. And sometimes even within one country, people are using different things. Which leads me on to the currency issues, which again can cause real problems with numbers if you haven't done the currency exchange properly. I've seen data where I've had quite a few £500 taxis in Sweden. Now I know Sweden's quite expensive, but it's not that expensive. So when we did a bit of digging, we realized we hadn't done the currency conversion properly. And then formatting issues. So I'm on a single screen today. I can't see the comments, but what I would really love for you to do right now, whatever platform you're on, is write how you format your date in the chat box. So whether it's day, month, year, or month, day, year, or day, month, year, spell out. Do you use dashes? Do you use slashes? Do you use dots? I bet there's 100 different ways that dates are being shown in the chat right now, because everybody's using something different. And that in itself causes problems when you try to match up invoices or documents, etc. And all of those things will ultimately lead to our good old friends, the duplicates. I don't think I've seen a data set that doesn't have duplicates in there. They are a huge problem, but we can help to try and minimize it by, becoming more standard with all these other things. And I work in the spend data classification world with procurement data. So I wanted to show with you some examples of data from my world that actually might get you thinking about data in a different way. So first of all, this is LinkedIn. So we all know LinkedIn, we're on it now, we're live. It's a networking, recruiting, training platform. What it is not is a restaurant, but somebody classified it as that because they looked at the description. And what I really want to highlight here is the importance of looking at your data as a whole, in context. So not just one cell, not just one row, but all the columns, all the rows, to get a picture of what in this case, it's a supplier, but it could be products, it could be something else. It will give you so much more context, and it will help you pick out anything that's wrong. Now, I think the person was just kind of lazy when they did this and just looked at the description, and that's why they classified it incorrectly. But stuff like this happens in my world all the time. And the next example that I want to share with you is about assumptions. And actually, I've posted about that. I'm doing the data advent, so 24 days of data Christmas tips that I'm giving you. And today we're talking about assumptions. Before I talk that, there's thermal installations. That's when people just don't read the information. They're not thermal insulation, it's installation. So again, you have to be really careful and not just skim over things. Then SurveyMonkey, again, known as a market research company, I had somebody classify this as consulting. So you have to just double check, because a lot of the data I work with, and if you're working with your data all the time, you should kind of know it. You should know or be familiar when things are right or not. And then my favorite is Tinder Corporation, because we all think of Tinder, the online dating app, but actually this came in and the client, well, the description first of all says data cabling. So I thought that's not right. And then I also thought, in context, the client I was working for would not be using Tinder in any way, shape or form. So when I did a bit of digging, I discovered that there's a Tinder Corporation Limited in the UK that is an IT services company. So you should never just assume that you think you know something is right. Again, use the data, use the context to help you make that decision and make sure it's as right as it can be. And of course, you know, it's easy for me to show you a couple of lines and go, oh, look, these are wrong. You know, the reality is we are dealing with hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands of rows of data. It's really hard to spot these things unless you know how to look for it, which I'm going to talk about later on. So when we're classifying or working with data, how can we kind of manage this? So we need to remember that, you know, look at context. So look at the vendor and the description when classifying, or if it's a product, look at the product and the dimensions, the product and the price. You know, there's lots of different things that can guide you. And again, don't assume that you just know what something is. Double check. Look at those values to guide classification, or if you're buying items, you know, and every past purchase history, you've paid $5 for something, and suddenly the next one's $20. Is that somebody, or $50? Has somebody put an extra zero in? Does that look right? You know, start to think about it like that. Again, looking at the whole picture. And if you do have to Google it, you know, does the website you find match what's in your data? Because, you know, I find, you know, working globally that there can be the same company name operating in different countries as different things. So you have to just be aware of that. And, you know, anything new, Google it. You know, that is my best tool. And I've seen people put Googling as a skill now, and I'm with them on that. It's a proper skill. So it's not just classification. I normalize a lot of suppliers. So in this instance, there's Grainger, WW Grainger, Grainger Inc., which is the same company, but there's also Grainger PLC, which is in the UK. I initially made the mistake of normalizing them all to Grainger in the early days, but actually Grainger PLC in the UK is a house builder. Grainger in the US is industrial products, lots of nuts, bolts and screws. And what would happen is when I normalized that product, I would then classify Grainger as everything under hardware. But the reality is some of that is actually like house rent or something else. So it's been misclassified. So again, it's those assumptions. Don't just think you know something, double check, look at the descriptions, look at the GL codes, look at whatever you have to help guide you with that. So remember, don't assume. And, you know, there are suffixes at the end of company names that help tell you where they're from. So PLC Limited tends to be the UK, SPZOO tends to be Poland, SA's kind of Spain, the PTY is kind of Australia, Asia. So there are, you know, it will help guide you and help you find that information. And think about where the supplier is located. You know, is it the same supplier that you think it is, or is it a different supplier but with the same name? And so that's all the dirty data, but why is it important? Why should we even bother with it? Well, first of all, if you have clean data, you are going to save yourself so much time fixing the dirty data. I mean, I dread to think how many hours a week are spent just fixing things that are wrong. And it can be costly to rectify because you might have to get someone else in to do it. You know, it might be so bad that you have to start again from scratch. It's going to affect your decision-making processes. So your budgets for the year, staff bonuses, headcounts, redundancies, the direction of the business. decisions are made on that data, if it's wrong, the wrong decisions could be made. And the whole company could be impacted on that. You know, it doesn't touch, it's not exclusive to one area. The whole business will be affected by it. And let's face it, dirty data makes your life more difficult. And who wants that? We want to make it as easy as possible. But it's not just all negative, negative, negative. You know, if we have clean data, we could increase the profitability for our company. Now, you know, you might think, well, that's for the company, why should I bother? Because that will affect things like your bonuses, promotions, pay rise, all those kinds of things. If you can increase the profitability of your team by saving time on projects, you know, that's going to look and work very well in your favor. So what about the consequences when it goes a bit wrong? And I'm sure you have all got stories. I have a whole chapter in my book dedicated to data horror stories that were anonymously donated to me by my connections on LinkedIn. So it can go really wrong. It can start with reporting and decision making. So if in the procurement world, that can affect cost savings. You might not be able to make as many cost savings as you thought you could, or you could make more, but you don't have the data to back it up. Then you've got supplier negotiations. You know, you go into a meeting with data and your supplier has data, and more times than not, those numbers don't match. You want to go in with the best, most accurate data that you have so you can negotiate the best decisions. Things like supplier rationalization. So like I showed you with the normalization, you can actually, you might think you've got, you know, an example with a client was they had 43,000 suppliers, but when I normalized that down, it came down to 34,000. So there were lots of versions of the same thing. So when you're trying to report on how much you have bought or sold to a client, if you've got multiple versions of it that haven't been normalized properly, you're not getting the proper picture there. And it's going to affect things like forecasting too. You might not forecast enough raw materials, like for planning and manufacturing or distribution, and that could put you out of stock of a best-selling product or something like that. It could cause a lot of problems. And then budgets as well. You know, are you getting the most of the budgets this year? Maybe not, because your data's not right. And then when it comes to things like CRM systems, you know, if you've got multiple versions of the same person in there, or the wrong name attached to the address, you could be mailing out to all these people who don't exist or don't live at that address. You know, you want to make sure you're targeting the right people. So this is an example of where cleaning your data, normalizing it in an analytics context is really powerful. This is an example of what I would see in a normal data file. Normally, there would be many more rows, but there's various versions of the same companies here. When this is normalized, if you look at what you see as the main PricewaterhouseCoopers here, we're looking at about 75,000. But when we normalize that, actually we find we've only got 4 suppliers, and that spend with PwC isn't 75,000 at all, it's 190,000. That's a huge difference. I mean, that's the power of normalization. And it might not be suppliers that you do, it could be products or groups, categories, it could be anything. And that's the difference that it really highlights of what you could be putting back to your business when you get asked for information, etc. And then there's technology implementation. You know, data cleansing is, I say often here, it's always neglected. Nobody ever pays enough attention to it. The errors generally are only found post-implementation. You find that the staff lose faith in the data, they become disengaged, they claim it doesn't work, they don't trust it because it's wrong, and they end up going back to their siloed spreadsheets after you've spent millions on your nice new technology. And then it costs a lot of money to fix. You've got to hope that your staff will then reuse that technology. or the project becomes abandoned, you know, and I have genuinely heard of millions of pounds, dollars of software or projects being completely thrown out because they didn't get the data right at the start. And then we come to AI, machine learning, and automation. Now, Newton have a great tool, but it really is only as powerful as the data you put in it. It can do amazing things, but if your data's wrong, it's going to learn wrong things for you. So again, you've got to cleanse and prepare that data beforehand, make sure it's clean, so that when machine learning does learn from those training data sets, it's learning the right thing. Same with machine learning. It might be codes or instructive learning, but if you give someone the wrong data set, the wrong coding is going to happen. And it really is true what they say, the old adage about rubbish in or garbage in and rubbish out or garbage out.